everyone, and welcome back to another special edition of Concise Game Reviews. I'm your host, Relic Delta, and today I am going to be talking economic theory with you. Now, hold on. Don't click away, because I'm going to be talking economic theory with you because it impacts the games industry. In the past couple of years, we've seen the games industry heavily impacted by layoffs, studio closures, and games of all variety undersell their expectations. And, everybody's got an idea around this. And I'm here today to convince you that the reason for this is actually a lot simpler than I think a lot of people are making it out to be. So the number one problem impacting the games industry right now, and really when we talk about the games industry, we should be talking about it in the totality of the market. But really, the number one problem impacting the games market right now is not live service games. It's not specifically COVID overhiring, though that didn't help. It probably made it worse. It's not the focus on reoccurring revenue over building new products. It's not bad managers or poor decision making, though obviously that stuff doesn't help either. It's not the refusal of developers to listen to player feedback, and it's not some bizarre notion that there aren't any good games anymore. Instead, the biggest problem impacting the games industry right now is a classic economic conundrum. There are too many suppliers and not enough demand. But Rally Car Delta, I hear you saying, what about all those other things you just mentioned? Don't they impact game sales? Isn't there an argument that all of these things are impacting the games industry? And the answer to that question is definitely yes. But when you want to really drill into something, as in most things in life, there's usually one, maybe two reasons that are impacting the outcome or the system more than everything else. And while the other things I mentioned definitely feed into how a game sells or the overall health of the market, or maybe the health of an individual product to be successful or fail in the market, again, let's get back to the core reason about why the games industry is in such a weird position at the moment. And it comes back to the classic economic principle of supply and demand. The core economic supply and demand imbalance is the biggest factor in why the games industry has seen an explosion of layoffs, studio closures, and product cancellations. In order to make this argument, though, I think we need to talk about how we got to today and how we ended up in a situation where the games industry has such an overabundance of suppliers. If you look back at any economic analysis of the games industry during the 2010s, basically call it anywhere from about 2006, 2007 to 2024, there was a bit of an uptick in consumer spending in games in the early 2010s, but consumer interest in the games industry, consumer interest in spending in the games industry truly ramped up around the 2015, 2016 timeframe. This upshot in consumer spending was complemented by new market entrants. Everyone from small indie studios to large AAA suppliers, new and old, mind you, wanted to get in on this sudden increase in consumer interest. There's a tendency for market analysis if you look at any of the market analysis that's been done in games, there's a tendency for a lot of that analysis to focus on the explosion of mobile growth from 2016 to 2022. But what we cannot do is forget about this expansion of suppliers occurred across the industry. It wasn't just mobile. It wasn't just indie. It wasn't just AA. It wasn't just AAA. It was everybody. And I don't know how much you might have been paying attention between, say, 2016 and 2022, but it practically became commonplace to see something along the lines of veteran game dev founds new studio about every other month from about 2017, 2018 to about 2021, 2022. It practically became a meme where so-and-so veteran or so-and-so group of veterans were founding a new studio to make XYZ type of game better than where they came from. And this was also fueled by a lot of rise in venture capital that kind of occurred, I'd say, later in the 2010s as you start to enter the 2020s. But again, the fact that we should be focusing on is the raw amount of supply that is delivered into the system. But you know what? Don't take my word for it. Just go pull some numbers. So you can easily go to SteamDB and you can pull up Steam game releases by year. And while, of course, Steam is obviously the PC market, as I explained in my last special edition, taking a sample set is generally representative of the whole, right? However, so the easiest sample set that you can pull to see this phenomenon is the Steam game releases by year chart on SteamDB. And you may be thinking, isn't the Steam count impacted by asset flips, fake games, half-finished product? And the answer is yes, but that's how bad this oversupply problem is. Even when you remove that population from the data set, you are still talking a spike in literal thousands of new product hitting the game's market. And it is especially marked from about 2014, 2015 and on. There is this broad and vast increase in the raw amount of supply that is being dumped into the market from a strictly numbers perspective. And remember, that is even considering the removal of the, for lack of a better term, the underlying population count of junk that floods into Steam. By comparison, Steam only saw under 500 game releases by year prior to 2014. But starting in especially 2015, 2016, you see this sudden and impactful ramp up in supply. We're talking thousands. We're talking multiple thousands of new games being dumped into the market all the way through and including 2024. It should be noted that this market oversupply, and remember, this is only looking at a representative sample set in Steam, but this market oversupply problem, or at least the argument that I'm making about a market oversupply problem, doesn't slow down at all. You're talking thousands of new product dumped into the market every year from about 2015, 2016, all the way through 2024, and it continues today. And keep in mind, this ramp up in supply is not just happening on Steam. It's happening across the games market. We're talking the console ecosystems. We're talking mobile. We're talking the entirety of the games market. Steam, again, is just a representative sample set of a phenomenon that was impacting the entirety of the market. The other component of this that I want to point out is that with this rush of supply into the market comes with it a general increase in employee count across the entire industry. For a while, at least almost every supplier in games was hiring. It doesn't matter if it was mobile, non-mobile, indie, AA, AAA, everybody was hiring to some degree in this market. Why do I bring up employment numbers? Because employment is costly to a company, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent, you've got to pay people to be there. And when you pay more people to be there, that higher cost starts cutting into profitability. And we're going to cover that a little bit. Hold that thought for a second, because we're going to cover that a little bit when we actually get down into the ramifications of an oversupplied market. Okay, now that we have the history out of the way, we're going to bring this all back to classical supply and demand theory, and I'm going to tie that to the games industry as it stands today. In an oversupplied, saturated market, one of the leading indicators is price drops and or aggressive price drops. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't AAA games $70? And I mean, yeah, they're $70 at release, but you can't just focus on the AAA release price as evidence that price isn't dropping. You have to look at the spectrum of prices in the games industry. And also, to be quite frank, the $70 for a AAA game is still arguably cheaper in a pure economic sense than it was in the 1990s. And that has to be an entirely other it has to be an entirely other special edition. So we'll save that for another time, right? But don't focus on the $70 price tag on new AAA releases. You've got to look at the spectrum of prices in an oversupplied market. And what you typically see in an oversupplied market is price drops. And I don't think that there's any argument to be made that the games industry today isn't consistently driving price down. Whether you want to talk about just the availability of free to play, whether you want to talk about the price of an indie or AA, or sometimes a AAA game that goes into an immediate discount rate, it's happening across the spectrum. I mean, how many games do you wait, or how many games do you see today that get aggressively discounted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months from the release date? Right? I mean, there's a Steam sale going on right now, and there's a lot of newish games in there that are now 50% off, right? Go to any of the console stores today. New releases by big publishers and small publishers usually see their price drop very quickly now. It's a wait a little bit and buy cheaper kind of market right now, and that is a prime example of an oversupplied market. There's too much supply, and there's too much supply, and suppliers have to aggressively discount their products to get people to buy them. Reduced profits are another ramification of an oversupplied market. And this might sound a little strange, but if you look at, just as an example, if you look at some of the bigger suppliers, like whether you want to look at EA or Take-Two, or even Sony, Game and Network Services, their profitability is strained. In fact, what we saw with a lot of these companies is that, especially during the swell of COVID revenue, they went and acquired more assets. They went and acquired more companies, and then a couple years later, when COVID slows down, the market starts kind of returning back to its, we'll call it normal, even though I don't think there's anything normal about the market right now. Kind of talking about how normal consumer spending, now the profitability of all of these companies is challenged. And while I'm only using the AAA companies as an example here, just take a look at their numbers. They're driving bigger and bigger and ballooning revenues than ever before in many of these cases, partially thanks to their acquisitions. How profitable is that revenue? There's one thing that we've heard from practically every AAA and AA CEO. It's, we need a return to profitability. And that's actually a good transition to the next topic when we talk about evidence of an oversupplied market, and that's market exit. You have, in an oversupplied market, you will have a multitude of suppliers who can't make the bottom line work. And this drives market exit. And I don't think there is any way to ignore that in the games industry right now. We have seen a plethora of closures across the board. And it's everything from individual closures of, whether it be small studios or independent developers or AA studios to individual studios at bigger conglomerates, right? Where, you might have, you might have a bigger supplier or you might have a bigger publisher, but they're going to close this individual business unit or this individual studio. So market exit, again, evidence of an oversupplied market. Now, here's one you might not be thinking of when it comes to an oversupplied market: marketing and advertising cost. In an oversupplied market, companies generally have to overspend on marketing and advertising costs to stand out. And this is a double whammy because in an oversupplied market, not only are you fighting for, you're fighting within the crowd, to pull consumer interest, but now you're having to spend more on marketing and advertising just to get people to pay attention to your product. And I think there's no better example of this than what Monopoly Go, I think it's Scopely, had to spend or chose to spend. I guess no one has to spend anything, but I think some of the best evidence of this is the amount, I think it was $500 million that Scopely spent on advertising and user acquisition for Monopoly Go. And here's the really unfortunate other side of that. If you're a smaller supplier or you don't have the funds to compete against the advertising juggernaut that can be some of the larger publishers, you basically are having to go about it, through word of mouth or try to do some more viral or smaller scale advertising, whether that be through social media or something along those lines, right? But marketing and advertising costs, especially for the biggest suppliers, will generally go up in a saturated market. Oversupplied markets also have this interesting side effect when it comes to consumer benefit, because I don't think anybody can look at the games industry right now and say, I don't have a plethora of choices. We are flooded with choice right now. And there is a side to this for the buyer side, for the consumer side, that says, well, I benefit from an overly supplied market because prices are driven down and I have all the choice in the world. I have every game type available at my fingertips. So, some people may even be saying to themselves, why do I care? Why do I care that the market is oversupplied? That just means that I have more choices. And yeah, to an extent, that is true. An oversupplied market does benefit consumers to some extent. But you can imagine the long-term impact of an oversupplied market actually has greater ramifications beyond just, oh, I have 1,000 games to pick from, right? The long-term instability of a market from oversupply has long-term ramifications on employment. It has long-term ramifications on the stability or the ability of that market to self-sustain. So, yes, there is a consumer benefit side to an oversupplied market, but over a long enough period of time, the negative impact of an oversupplied market will begin to actually work against the consumer, as in, maybe your favorite studio cuts back, or maybe they have to close, or maybe somebody has to exit the market, and they're one of the only a handful of companies that were trying to make a game of that style or that variety. Anyway, the point is that while there may be some short-term consumer benefit from an oversupplied market, the economic instability of the system eventually harms the entire ecosystem, whether it be employment or the ability to profit or the ability of new entrants to even find a space in which to compete. So if you've made it this far in this episode, you may be thinking at this point, so what happens now? So great, you've convinced me or partially convinced me that the actual core problem in the games industry is an overabundance of supply and not nearly enough demand to consume it all. So what happens? Well, unfortunately, there really are only two ways to balance this equation. You either have to have a drop in supply that falls enough so that demand and supply are essentially in equilibrium. I mean, does any market actually ever reach perfect equilibrium? And the answer to that question is no, right? The market's always going to be in some kind of flux where, whether you have supply and demand outpacing each other. But markets almost always drive towards equilibrium in some way, shape, or form. So the other side of this equation, if we can't fix the supply side, is the demand side. And unless we're going to start cloning millions of people and have them start consuming video games, which is total nonsense, the only side of this equation when it comes to video games that can really fix the problem, so to speak, is the supply side. And that's exactly what you're seeing now. The last 2 years of games industry closures, layoffs, cutbacks is the supply side of the equation trying to fix itself. And while I'm sure a lot of people don't want to hear it because the unfortunate impact of that is job loss, it is fewer available jobs, fewer available studios, fewer available suppliers to the games market. The games market is essentially forcing itself to come back to an equilibrium, which, if there is good news in the longer run, it's that at some point, and I don't know what that point is, to be quite frank, but at some point, the market will return to as close as it can be to equilibrium, and the layoffs and closures and project cutbacks should slow down. The thing that we just don't know right now is where that is. And I think that's the thing that we're all going to be kind of watching, over the next year or two to see is if we get closer to that equilibrium. And when I say equilibrium, I'm talking about the job loss and studio exits from the economic standpoint, the stuff that's being driven mostly by the fact that there isn't enough, there's an overabundance of supply and not enough demand to consume it. There's no way to avoid in games, or any other industry for that matter, just the failure of a product in the market that could possibly result in a studio closure or layoff. It's important to kind of separate those two concepts, because even in a market that is in perfect equilibrium, some theoretical market where supply perfectly equals demand, you're still going to have the day-to-day, year-to-year product and business decisions at individual suppliers, whether that be a giant publisher or a small indie studio. It is time to start wrapping this up, and unfortunately, there really isn't anything I can leave you with that is going to make some prediction that this is all going to be better soon, or there isn't any advice that I can give you in terms of what could you do to fix some of this. Unfortunately, especially if you're coming at this from the consumer side, the only thing you can really do is simply to continue to participate in the market. It's what every buyer or consumer does. We only have so much time in the day. We only have so much money to spend. So the only thing you can do is do that. You can just continue to make the choices that you make, and right, wrong, or indifferent, the market will drive itself to some sort of balance or eventual, close to, but not exact equilibrium where the system can self-sustain. So unfortunately, I don't have any great advice for you in this case, but I do hope that perhaps next time you read some games industry news, or you see a topic on, X or Blue Sky or wherever it may be, that perhaps you think about it in different terms from, the talking points that are generally thrown out there. So anyway, I hope you learned something today. This is Relic R Delta signing out.